so let's talk about the Pokemon Omega, the Mechagodzilla that was supposedly scrapped by Mew. Well, as it seems, I would say that as far as the scrapped Pokemon go, Omega was the very first scrap Pokemon that was not in the original Pokemon Gen 1. And so, from what we understand, the concept art that they got for Mechagodzilla was obviously from like the old monster Japanese movies. Again, like take like Ultraman 7 for example, as well as stuff like Dragon Age, Dragon Quest, and all that, but mostly Ultraman 7, as well as, old Tokyo monster movies that had like Mothra, Mechagodzilla, Godzilla itself, Godzuki, if I remember correctly. Basically, a bunch of Pokemon were inspired by, old Japanese monster movies. So now that we've established that a couple times, because this is where it's going to get important, Mechagodzilla would have been a security bot that was well equipped to defend the Saffron City. And I mean, the concept of this is kind of like where they got the idea for it. Saffron City is a huge city. Might have had something to do with fighting off someone like Giovanni, maybe. But maybe Giovanni still found a way around it, though. There was also this other character called Techno Jack that, believe it or not, was scrapped entirely from the game. I think that's where you were supposed to originally get the card key for, but Techno Jack was actually a character that used a Omega, and he's the only character in the game that I know of that does use it. So that and a Porygon. So it's really interesting, like, again, a scrapped idea. Not to mention, what's really interesting is some people, if you want to know, like, the asset that it's based on could actually be real, the Techno Jack asset, think of it like this. They actually got Jack Levin. If you're an F-Zero fan like I am, there's a character named Jack Levin who drives the Astro Robin F-Zero machine. And he kind of looks like, I mean, in the anime version of F-Zero, he does sort of look like Techno Jack, as well as if you're a Virtual Fighter fan. One of the fighters was, I think one of them was named Jack, but he wasn't Techno Jack though. He's just like he's like tall, thin. He's got like his hair sort of like all spiky. It's like something like a wild hairdo, And they sort of did the same thing with F-Zero. As well, it's kind of funny, he looks like him, but he's not a robot, though. And so I think that's kind of like another nod off to Nintendo. Nintendo usually usually I've noticed that if they don't use certain ideas, they'll recycle it in something else completely. So they got the idea from somewhere based on something else. Again, people in Japan, it's like they're one big family. They're always inspiring other people, and they don't have a problem with that, obviously. But, again, so Omega was an electric type, from what I understand. It learned a bunch of electric moves. It also was it was kind of like a fighting type, too, but it wasn't a pure fighting type. It learned a bunch of, physical attacks, but at the same time, like, electricity, because, of course, it's a robot. So, it was supposed to be a Pokemon that, I don't know how you would have got it in the game. Again, it's a prototype, I guess, so who knows where you would have got it from originally. Maybe somewhere in the Silph Co. Again, Silph Tower. Saffron City. Okay, so basically, maybe, and you know what, maybe it's funny, maybe that's where they originally, maybe the guy that gives you Lapras, maybe he was supposed to give you an Omega. Who knows? That's a good question, actually. Probably not, though. But I'm guessing that Omega had Blastoise's battle cry, so maybe that kind of explains where they got the idea for it at. But at the same time, though, Blastoise didn't have like a beta cry that we know. So some Pokemon shared like some of the same beta cries. So that's interesting. So Blastoise was a little bit different, then Mechagodzilla was a little bit different, or again, Omega. But really, what I ultimately think, the reason they scrapped it was because they just probably didn't vote on it. Like, they didn't think it was popular enough, and because they had to cut back on certain Pokemon, they agreed to 151, probably because that's what they could only handle. And then, of course, they programmed Mew in the game, so Mew overrided because Satoshi Tajiri liked Mew or loved Mew a lot more. Mind you, keep in mind, that was his very favorite Pokemon. And rightfully so, because Mew was the very first Pokemon that was trademarked. To Satoshi Tajiri, this was a big deal. So that's what happened. And so because of that, I think originally that's why they had 151 Pokemon. Maybe they agreed, okay, because they had like 300 concept arts, but then they probably lowered it down to 300 or 150, and then they decided to put 151 in. Because I think Mew was eventually going to find its way into the final version of the games one way or another, but at the same time, though, it would have been in Gen 2 without a doubt, at some point. So I'm kind of glad they decided to, put Mew in when they did, because it actually ended up making, in Japan, it ended up being the reason they sold even more, Although it wasn't programmed. See, it was a secret at the time, but, like, as time went on, like, Mew was in the game's files. So, of course, that's what was required to make the game what it was. So, people in Japan were discussing this at the time, and they were trying to figure out what the 151 was, because nobody had really heard of this. But if you read the documentations in the game's story, it hints that there is another Pokemon. Mewtwo was the very last one, technically, but where did Mew come from, right? So there had to have been another one. Maybe that's how they originally wanted you to capture it, it wasn't really programmed yet, but it was like they did add it into the game. So they did finish it, but it was supposed to be a secret, though. Yeah. So anyways, Omega was a Pokemon that was electric. It was a Silphco product, and kind of like Porygon, the scientists were experimenting a lot with like man-made Pokemon, as well as Technojack. It's supposed to be in a very advanced, technology and all that. And they also had Pokemon like Ditto, where there were a bunch of scientists that were trying to create a bunch of Pokemon that could transform like Mew, but they weren't able to somehow perfect the art of it. So basically, it was it just kind of had its ideas. Now, is there a Pokemon that's based on Omega? I don't think so at the moment. I think it's just one of those very few Pokemon that it was like its own Pokemon, but like as of right now, I can't think of any Pokemon that it was recycled into. Unless I'm wrong, and I could be. I hope I am, because it would be really cool to know what Pokemon that this was really based on. I mean, like, if there was another one that they decided to turn it into, and was an electric type, maybe not a fighting electric type. I don't think there's a fighting electric type right now. If I'm starting to forget the dual types, but if there isn't an electric fighting type, they should totally bring Omega back. I would really love to see that. It doesn't have to be exactly like Omega, but it could be a somewhat inspired Pokemon. Actually, it'd be pretty cool to see that, actually. So yeah, if you're not subscribed already, please subscribe. If I find any more content, I'll let you know. But I think it's really interesting to just keep talking about these things, because, Omega, you go back to like the 60s of Japan. You're talking about people made like these old monster movies. And then like 20 years later, like 20, 30 years later, after that's been done, people are still making ideas based on these traditions. And then it's like another 30 years later, where going back and talking about the stuff that happened 60 years ago that inspired other games about 30 years ago. It's cool. Like, I mean, even Ultraman 7, Ultraman 7, I always thought it was really cool how they did the robots and all that, because like the faces they had and the life force that they used, like it just like once you started seeing it, it's like you just like you want to know more about it. Something about Japan, man, they always were really good at this stuff. They always knew, like, once you They knew how to capture your interest, and they just like you wanted to know more. Like the energy was there, and the soul was there. Like it just like what was it trying to tell us? You know, what was the metaphor? So it's amazing how they made this stuff back in the day. The people that wrote this stuff, they were full of energy, charisma, and inspiration. And you know what? If that's not the ticket to happiness of success, I don't know what is. So again, please subscribe if you're not, and we'll do the best we can to talk about these people and their legacies. But until then, I have to keep looking for more prototype data.